Hello, government students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 10, Section 2, Presidential Salary and the Vice President and Succession. So, as we go along here, we're going to talk a little bit about presidential succession, but I do want to mention that our president, for the most part, is paid a fairly decent salary. If you go back maybe about to the 1990s, a president was earning somewhere around $250,000 a year. During the Obama administration, that got pumped up. So our president today is earning just a little shy of $500,000 for every year. There have only been two presidents in U.S. history that have turned down the salary of president. The first being Herbert Hoover, who, for the most part, at the time he was elected in the 1920s, he was probably the wealthiest man to ever become president. And more recently, President Donald Trump. Both have turned down salaries. A lot of that money is given away or given back to the government. So let's talk about presidential succession. If a president is unable to carry out their duties of office, uh, this kind of opens up the door to this possible situation where a president's going to have to be replaced. And usually that happens when obviously a person dies or a person resigns or disability. And the question is, what really would make a person disabled? If we went back to the Woodrow Wilson administration, there was a lot of secrecy that was happening within that White House. Woodrow Wilson had had a stroke in the last really year and a half of his presidency. And for the most part, it was pretty much kept under wrap. The first lady pretty much kept out a lot of people so that they wouldn't have personal contact with the president. In this day and age, it would be harder to do that. And so we have this as an option. So if we have a president that's not able to carry out the duties of their job, that they can be basically replaced, okay, by the vice president. Or if there is a traumatic situation, then that would mean probably the Speaker of the House. All right. Congress, for the most part, if there is a situation, would be notified if either the president or the vice president or the vast majority of cabinet members, if there is an issue here. So if, let's say, for example, and this has happened in your lifetime, but you could have a president that might be undergoing a medical procedure, or a vice president, by all means. What they would do is they would notify their cabinet. They would notify, let's say, the president or vice president, depending on who it is. And it would be known that maybe for a period of time, if the president's going under anesthesia, that the vice president would, for a period of time, carry out the duties of the White House or the nation if that's needed. And then once the president came to, then those powers would be transferred back to the president. Okay, that has happened several times. All right. Other issues. A successor, as specified by the Constitution, becomes the acting president. We actually do have a line of succession. For the most part, if the president obviously is unable to fulfill their duties, the vice president would be next, and then followed by that would be our Speaker of the House. For the most part, this only really comes into play a few times a year. Typically, when the president's giving their State of the Union, there's always this concern that something catastrophic could happen at that moment. If you had all the members of Congress and all the members of the cabinet, the president and the vice president all in one place. So typically on that night, one of the cabinet members will be designated to stay away from Capitol Hill, and they will be off in seclusion just in case something would happen, because then they would fulfill the acting role of president if the entire rest of our government would get wiped out. All right. If the president recovers from their disability, he or she may resume the office by notifying Congress that he or she is able to carry out their duties. And that's basically kind of the way we would do that. When we talk about some of the rules within the executive office, I want to talk a little bit about some of these people that you see here. We're going to talk about Geraldine Ferraro and obviously Nancy Pelosi and Mike Pompeo and Mike Pence here in just a moment. But according to the Constitution, the president and the vice president have to be at least 35 years of age to fulfill or hold that office. A serious candidate for the presidency has access, obviously, to large amounts of money. They really almost have to if they want to win, because it's going to cost a lot of money to run a campaign. Major political parties usually choose presidential candidates who hold moderate positions on most of the issues. So if you are an extremist, you're going to polarize people, and it's going to be harder to vote a person into office. But if you're kind of middle of the road, certainly you'll have a greater appeal to the vast majority of people that can be voting. And number 4, Geraldine Ferraro, who we saw previously. She was a Democratic candidate for vice president in 1984. Walter Mondale, who had been the nominee for the Democratic Party that year, nominated her to run as his vice president. They unfortunately were running against Ronald Reagan. Okay, he was a juggernaut. I mean, it was going to be really hard to defeat Reagan in the White House, and certainly they weren't able to do that. But she gets the notoriety of being the first woman to be nominated by a major party for any high office. All right. Number 5, the 25th Amendment established the order of succession to the presidency, and it spelled out what happens when the vice presidency becomes vacant. You know, there was a time when William Henry Harrison, who had been our president, was sworn in a rainstorm and literally dies within a month of being sworn in as president. His vice president, John Tyler, assumes the office, but there is no provision in the Constitution at that point in time for finding a replacement vice president. And hence, over the years, with assassinations and such, it became kind of necessary to have an order spelled out. And that's why that 25th Amendment kind of came about. Number 6, if the office of the president and vice president would become vacant, Speaker of the House is next in line. Today, that would be Nancy Pelosi. Next in line for the president, after the president pro tempore of the Senate, which, by the way, is Chuck Grassley right now, would happen to be the Secretary of State, and that would be Mike Pompeo. The vice president will take over for the president if the vice president and the majority of the cabinet or any other body authorized by law informs Congress that the president is disabled. And number 9, unless Congress decides in the vice president's favor by a 2/3 majority vote in each house, the president may resume the office. It's possible that they could choose not to do that. We've never seen that happen, but that could happen. Anyway, the vice president presides over the Senate and votes in that body only if there is a tie. All right, thank you very much.